Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Today, I have a very special guest. Jinny Uppal is a Harvard Business School alumni, speaker, business growth strategist, and author. Her new book, Inaction, Rethinking the Path to Results, just came out last year, and she's here to talk about business, entrepreneurship, and of course, how the rise of hustle culture is responsible for our current levels of burnout, and why reflective thinking and strategic inaction is a better and healthier path to success. Jinny has spent her career in leadership roles at major companies like Kohl's, Macys, and IBM, and believes that determining when to lean in and when to let go is the key to keeping burnout at bay, unblocking creative inspiration, and allowing the workforce to achieve even their most ambitious goals. Jinny, welcome to the show.
It's wonderful to be here, Lance. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love your background. And so speaking of that, before we kind of get into exactly what you do and everything surrounding your book, I'm so interested to learn about some of the things within it. Tell us how you got into entrepreneurship and business. You know, did you grow up in a family of entrepreneurs? Was it quite the opposite? What led you here?
My family background, I'm originally from Mumbai. And in Mumbai, back then, 80s and 90s, you either had your own business as a man, or if you were a woman, you got married, ideally to a businessman. And I come from a family where having a job was kind of considered not that great of a career option. That's my background. But as a woman, having a career was also unusual. So I consider myself one of the luckiest ones where my parents, who passed away many years ago, they actually supported higher education for women, their daughters. And so I moved here for grad school. I've predominantly had a corporate background. So I've worked for large companies, as you pointed out. But my background is technology, which means I've always worked with startups, innovative ideas. And I was very often the one to bring technology and disruptive ideas into a very large company. So I was an entrepreneur before that term became popular. And now with this book, nowadays, the term of entrepreneur has come about. As a first-time author, the book is a product that I launched. So learning how not just to write, but publish, but market, it's been an interesting journey.
I love that new term. I honestly have never heard that, but I'm going to pass it on to my business partner because he created a book too. And we've been thinking about doing a book here too, Authorpreneur. I love that. Well, let's get into everything hustle culture related. I thought that was such an interesting topic that you have. And man, you're really, I hope this episode hits a nerve with people because we do have a lot of millennials, even some Gen Z that listens to this. And I see the social media posts too of hashtag hustle culture or whatever. And so it sounds like, and I could be wrong here, that maybe your ideas are going counter to that, which I think is great. So why don't you tell us everything about what you think hustle culture is, and then how it's evolved to become the norm among younger professionals, like I described.
Right. Hustle culture, the phrase, is relatively new, the last, say, 10 years or so. Mm-hmm. The concept of hustling or schlepping or, doing what you have to do, I want to distinguish between pulling your weight, having to work hard because you got to get this project out versus hustle culture, which is a lifestyle of doing that all the time for months and years. And you are trapped in this lifestyle because you started off thinking, I just got to have, gig economy came about 10 years ago. If I were to just work hard the next couple of years, multiple gigs, I'll be financially independent. That was the promise of hustle culture 10 years ago. And millennials especially really drove. In droves, they went for it, right? A new class of social media influencers came about. They started talking about their multiple gigs and how they work 80 hours, and it became glamorous. It got glorified. So of course the younger ones are like, this is how to be affluent and independent.
Yeah.
It's just that the promise of hustle culture hasn't paid out. What has happened instead is people have realized this is not sustainable. It has led to fatigue and burnout. People started giving up on sleep and rest. They started, taking prescriptive stimulants. In the book, I quote research that people aged between 20 and 39 were the largest growing segment for prescriptive stimulants, Adderall and what have you. The pandemic, as unfortunate as it was, has served as a wake-up call that this lifestyle that people have been living for 10 years is not sustainable. And my book is just timely that people are now willing to listen to this message. Had I put this book out 5 years ago, I think people would not want to hear that thoughtful pause. This is the way to go, right? There would be no appetite. Fortunately, now I believe there is an appetite to listen to this.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah, I think you're very timely with this book. It's so interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about culture. Do you think we have a cultural bias for action, especially in the United States, even when it's unnecessary or counterproductive? And why do you think it's maybe unnecessary, that it is unnecessary or counterproductive? In other words, why is it okay to be inactive sometimes?
Yeah. In the book, I talk about action bias, which is a pretty well understood bias like many others. It is not a disorder or a mental illness. It is a human tendency to act. We're just wired to take action. We are wired to create causality between action and results. I did this, which is why I got the result. So action bias there is no problem. It's just our tendency. What happened in the last, 10, 20 years is technology came and disrupted our life. I don't know, in 1950s, I wasn't in this country, but it wasn't that bad because people had the concept of 9-to-5 job, right? They weren't hustling like we are now. Mm-hmm. It's just that in the last 10, 20 years, our action bias has gotten worse. We have become convinced that we've simply got to do something all the time to get results, except the outcome of that lifestyle is we are not getting the results we want because we're so busy doing. We're not stopping long enough. My book, the title of the book is Inaction, Rethinking the Path to Results. So the book is all about getting results. I'm all for being ambitious. What I'm inviting is consider that hustling is not the only way to being successful. If you take a step back, creative ideas come forth. The book is really about creativity, and entrepreneurs especially, you cannot work long enough to be successful. It's the idea that will get you the success, not the schlepping of it.
Yeah. Do you think, this might be obvious, but I would just like you to reinforce it or counter it if you would, so do you think you talked about like now we have this idea of we have to be constantly doing something, right? Is there some tie with social media, the rise of social media that has maybe it's either added to it or exasperated it, or maybe it just went hand in hand? We're constantly at the behest of let's be entertained at all times. So then is the opposite of, or not the opposite of that, but the action that goes with it, we constantly have to be doing something.
Very much so. Social media eggs us on. The term FOMO, fear of missing out, came about again in the last 10 years or so. We have, on the one hand, social media was great because it helped us connect with the world. Discoverability happened because of social media. On the other hand, we're always on. We don't know how to shut down. We don't know how to give our minds a break. Even when we take a break, we're scrolling social media. There is neuroscience research that I quote in the book that talks about how when a mind is engaged, when you're reading or listening to music, your mind is engaged. So even when we take a break, we catch up on news thinking this is an easier activity, but your mind is occupied. Whereas there is neuroscience research that talks about parts of the brain that light up when you're actually doing nothing. You're not sleeping, you're not meditating, you're literally staring out into empty space. And when those parts of the brain light up, it connects the dots between all the information you've been collecting and comes up with ideas that you could not have brute force concentrated your way to. So the ideas in the book are very counterintuitive. It's very unnatural for me to say, if I take a step back and think, I'll get a better idea, but that is what the book is saying. You don't have to do everything at once. Give your mind a chance, give yourself a break. You'll come up with better ideas. And of course, take action. The book isn't about sitting around twiddling your thumbs. It is about taking the right action at the right time.
Yeah. Basically, I think you define it as strategic inaction. Can you define that for us?
Right. So it was an interesting dilemma for me. The word inaction brings to mind inertia, right? It's laziness, fear, or being paralyzed. Strategic inaction is my way of saying There are times when you want to leverage inaction as a choice. Even taking incessant action is a sign of fear or insecurity. So there are times when you take a step back and you say, either this is not the right action to take, or now is not the time to take action. So strategic action is nothing but inaction as a choice. It's a strategy. It's a way of life.
Yeah, yeah. If you had to, if it was one, if you were talking to just one listener right now, focusing on them, what would you tell them about how you can use reflective thinking and strategic inaction to achieve more by doing less? I mean, it seems counterintuitive, but I'm with you, especially from the creativity standpoint. Like when your mind is at rest, when you're in the shower, that's when those ideas pop up.
Right, right. That's a great example. A lot of people tell me they get their best ideas when they're in the shower or when they are driving. Mm-hmm. Which means their whole system is a little bit more in autopilot. I'll say this to all the entrepreneurs, since I am a new entrepreneur. When you're an entrepreneur, the weight of the world is on your shoulders. There simply aren't enough hours in the day to do everything you've got to do. And yet the tendency to then work long hours or to work harder is counter. It's actually going to slow you down. As hard as it may sound conceptually, this is something you've got to try to see if it works for you. It was hard for me writing the book. I had deadlines. I had, a number of words that I had committed. I would get stuck on an idea and I know I got to get this out, because if I don't get this out, there's a cascading impact on everything else that gets delayed. Hard as it was, I would walk away from the problem, or I would stop working at 6 or 7 in the evening and not look at it, not think about it, go for a walk, do something else. I tell you, it's magical. The next day, some idea comes forth. And this is something you've got to do it. So I recommend just the more busy you are, the more take 10 minutes out in the day, do nothing and see what happens.
Yeah. What could it hurt, right? And it doesn't need to be this very long period of time. I like that you actually pointed right to 10 minutes. I mean, that can make a huge difference. Just doing something like that. So one other thing, you mentioned COVID and some of the negatives and positives. And one of the big negatives is mental health, right? This isolation that people have been experiencing, just anxiety about, whether, no matter where you're at on what side of the political spectrum is it. So is there anything that strategic inaction can do to help with mental health that you've noticed or are noting in your book?
People often ask me, what does strategic inaction look like? Like, what are examples? And I sometimes struggle with that question, because I say, it's more a philosophy. If you imbibe, you will come up with ways of strategic inaction. In the world of COVID, I'll tell you what I have been doing. I have become very selective about the news I take in. Mm-hmm. And how much of the news, because the news is very sensational. It's, to your point, there's no concept of bipartisanship anymore. You kind of have to pick a lane nowadays. And as much as it's tempting to keep up with everything that's going on, all the fights in the world, what good is that doing you? What good is that doing me to keep up with it all the time? One example of strategic inaction, talking about mental health and all the anxiety that it produces, is cut down on the source of anxiety. And sometimes it is the news.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is that the corporate press is the enemy of the people, which is Michael Malice, if anybody knows who that is. But it's the truth. I mean, it's a toxifier for your mind. And I don't think focusing on something like that rather than focusing on yourself and what you can control, I think is really the way to go. How do you believe that behaviors, commonly thought as negative, like mind wandering? I'm one of those people, even procrastination. I'm not a procrastinator, but I definitely, I have trouble focusing sometimes, can actually drive creative thinking, because I got to think that with every negative, there's a positive.
Right. It's like I have a chapter on each in the book, because they have such a strong stigma. And it took something for me, first of all, to overcome my own biases against procrastination, against laziness, against mind wandering. So this book was as much me challenging my own deep-rooted beliefs and then finding a way to communicate that to others who have the same beliefs I used to have. I am not a procrastinator. So there are a couple of reasons why people procrastinate. One is you are truly not motivated. If you now go buy a book about 10 ways to not procrastinate and force yourself to do something you are intrinsically not motivated, you've just committed yourself to something you don't want to do. You've distracted yourself. So one is, do not dismiss why you are procrastinating. On the other end of the spectrum, people like me, I will never procrastinate. I'll always work extra hard, extra long to make sure I don't fall short. And I find myself doing more than is necessary. Procrastination, and I quote research, difference between active procrastination and passive procrastination. Passive is where you're helpless. It's a different problem to solve. Active procrastination is you are pushing the decision out, either because you need more information or because you need more time. It takes courage. We operate under deadlines and pressures from our stakeholders. It takes something to say, I'm not going to make the decision right now. I need some more time. You negotiate for time. Amazing new information can come forth. That's the advantage of active procrastination, is new data comes up to avoid making premature decisions. So I've been drinking the Kool-Aid myself and making myself, today is not the day to make this decision. I'll give it another day or another week.
Yeah. For me, what I've noticed is I've learned to let myself be pulled by the universe. When it's going in positive directions. If I know if there's something that I want to do that's going to result in a positive outcome, that I just follow that energy, and then that alleviates any. In other words, if you feel like if there's something you don't want to do, there's something to that, right? And maybe there's certain things you need to just cut out of your life entirely, that steer you away from that. Is there anything that we haven't touched base with about the book and what's in it that you'd like to talk about, Jinny?
The book is a collection of stories and examples, and I interviewed about more than 30 people across the world, different walks of life, investment managers, sports athletes and whatnot, and business people. What I would like to say, the book is not very prescriptive. On the one hand, it isn't a set of 10 steps to become, a person who uses strategic inaction. At the same time, there are specific examples from different people and how they leverage it. The fun thing that I found in reading the book is you may not identify with everybody's lifestyle, but you'll find somebody whose story kind of resonates with you. And I thought that was just my way of saying, I don't have a formula for you, but I have all these stories of people, and let that inspire you and ultimately find your own formula to leverage strategic inaction.
I love it. The stories are really interesting. I think that's one of the best way to learn from people. So I really hope everybody who's listened to this will at least consider looking into your book. I just think anything that goes counter to trends, I'm a contrarian by nature. And it's paid off dividends for me to always look at something from the opposite direction, take that thought process through and see if anything pans out of it. I think that's what you're doing with your book, because it's so trendy to do this hustle culture right now. So bravo. Right. One of the last questions I'd like to ask everybody, Jinny, is knowing what you know now, and if you could go back in time when you first started this book, what is one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
Things have a way of working out. The more pressure I try to put on myself and the universe to make things work, the more it'll work against me. It's a very distinct philosophy of when to lean in and when to let go. More often than not, I need to let go. That is the advice I need to give myself back then. And even now, it's a constant reminder, let go.
Yo, I love that. I love that so much. Jinny, if people like what they heard from you today, how and where can they follow you, get in touch with you maybe, and find the book?
I love listening from people. So the best way to get in touch with me is DM me on LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm easy to find. My first and last name, Jinny Uppal, is how you find me. You can go to jinnyuppal.com, GINNYUPPAL.com. And the book is available online wherever you buy books.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for being on the show today, Jinny. We really appreciated your time.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Lance.